Today the plan is
to distress denim at home.
So we know exactly how to cut.
Or should I trim half of the seam allowance?
I think I want to cry. There is no plan. I know. Genius. Was not easy to come up with that. Yeah, I thought we let AI decide what we're gonna make today.
And because we do like a little bit of a challenge, I set myself the goal that I have to pick an outfit within 5 prompts.
What are we gonna put in there? Shout your ideas. I thought we need to at least give a material, which I guess jeans, because you should know a little bit what to do with that, I suppose. Maybe we start with something a little more general. Cool upcycled jeans outfit. It's very disappointing. They put like a tiny shirt in the middle. I don't know, guys. Deconstructed, cool edgy deconstructed jeans outfit. Let's try that one. So it's actually giving us a patchwork. But underneath, there's a sort of layered effect underneath the holes of jeans. Or high fashion. Let's see. Deconstructed upcycled jeans look. Fringe, I do like that. Denim fringe along the sides of the jacket.
Well, may I have some applause? Because I guess we have a winner. Because after that, it was just going downhill.
Why is there a foot with a sock there? And unfortunately, it is absolutely not as oversized as sort of the essence of that jacket the girl is wearing. But if you go to buy a second-hand jacket here like this, it costs like 35 bucks, even if it's a cheap brand. So I thought maybe we can make this work. Try to make it more oversized by cutting it in.
But let's go step by step. Most important element, arguably, is the fringe at the outer sleeves, defining the silhouette of the jacket.
When I look at the tutorials, people go at tweezers, like, are you kidding me? Tweezers create this sort of loose denim, sort of distressed look. I hope we can avoid that because it looks like it's gonna take a long time. And I also saw where the more heavy-duty stuff with cheese grater.
The last time I distressed fabric, I used a nail file, which is definitely a viable option, but because we have to distress quite a lot of fabric, I want to find the most efficient technique with stuff I can find around the house.
So we'll be doing more. Don't want to die.
I started with this method because I thought it was not gonna work at all. Once you get the hang of this, no need for this strange sausage rolling technique, but take notes in your fashion journal because the foam mat is a must-have accessory this summer. It really made it so much easier to apply the right amount of pressure onto the jeans. You'll probably notice quickly that one side of the grater works much better than all the others, so use that to your advantage. And the trick is, this is the length of the leg of the jeans to grate consistently at a 90 degrees angle of that, mainly in one direction. And although it might not be as precise as certain other techniques, it is totally up to you guys. Or
Run.
I think I know what has my preference. Honestly, I feel like this is the best way to distress denim at home I found so far. Just don't underestimate the mess it makes. And if you value your life, you might want to wear protective gloves. And by the way, making some horizontal cuts like this will speed up the process even a bit more. Voila, the fringe is absolutely looking on fleek. And I happen to have this seam tape that is heat adhesive with the iron, so that seemed perfect, pun intended, to apply right at the edge of the fringe. This will hold everything together at least temporarily, and also create a clearly defined edge so we know exactly how to cut, or should I say trim, or trimmings down, which I'm doing next. Start with this beautiful long strip of fringe. In hindsight, that might have been the easy part. And I'll give you this one hot tip now. If you want to keep things a little simple, you can add the fringe into this shoulder seam and the seam on the back of the sleeve. This hack I actually found in the beginning of my channel when I was making a cowboy jacket. But you don't have to open the entire seam, only the top stitch at the edge. Pop the fringe in. You don't even have to sew for this. You can even close it with a hand stitch or some very good glue. But AI says we have to get the fringe really on the side of the sleeve and not on the back. This gonna be a challenge. Was AI not supposed to make our life easier? Oh well. I want to open the side seam as well as remove the whole sleeve out of the armhole, using my seam ripper to slash the stitches from the inside, then going from the outside as well, pulling a bit on the top stitch while slashing the bottom stitching. And when the seam is seriously compromised, you might do some careful ripping for your own risk. Be careful to not rip the fabric. The side seam I could really easily slice open with my seam ripper by sliding it right in the seam. Oh, you cannot tell me there's anything more satisfying in sewing than this pulling of a thread. At the waistband, I partly loosened the buckle and just cut it through, as well as it goes. Those denim jackets are some hefty constructions. I don't think I seam ripped so well. Anyway, things that look straightforward can sometimes be really the most challenging in design. Let's get out the collar as well. Contrasting collared collar. Yes, I can talk. It's really defining the design. Seam rip from the back. Try to open a few stitches. You have to be very careful with seam ripping, otherwise... Seam ripping stitch by stitch is usually the safest option. We want the entire collar detached from the jacket. Oh, and keep that loop at a safe spot. I turned the house upside down, and these were the only red fabrics I could find for the collar. I doubt a little bit, but I feel like this fabric is just not that attractive to me. This collar is just gonna, too basic.
Georgina, you're dismissed.
Why?
So we have to go for this, I assume. I guess it kind of fits the vibe. If you want to exchange the collar but want to keep the shape the exact same, you can actually use the collar just as a pattern, but don't forget to add seam allowance or round, which you can see on the inside. But now that we're at it anyway and have that entire freaking collar out, I thought we might as well take the opportunity and actually redesign the collar a little to make it a bit more of a statement. So I'm tracing half the collar onto paper. I'm not gonna make any changes to the base of the collar because we still want it to fit in the neckline well later. So I only want to add to the outer sides of the collar, basically trying to make the existing shape a little more pronounced, just the whole outer collar a little bit bigger, adding 1.5 centimeters in the middle back. Admittedly, it's been a long time that I've been doing something like this, so try to be a little conservative, not throw the entire balance of the collar off, hopefully. But if I remember well, at the corner of the collar you have a little more freedom and can add a little bit more on both sides. I guess that's around 2 centimeters, but remember at the neckline we don't want to add anything, so we'll go back to 0 there. So then that's the shape I came up with. Let's hope for the best. I want to reinforce the outer side of the collar, so I cut the shape one more time. If you have, use iron-on interfacing. Otherwise, be creative. I'm using a cotton 12 fabric and some spray glue. I'm not sure if that's a great idea, but come on. This jacket is rock and roll. I'm rock and roll. So I guess we'll just rock and roll with it. Then apply brute force with the iron. What did not sound quite right about that? Oh yeah, brute force. Oops, actually fabrics like this don't want to press completely flat. You get the whole texture out of it, but I realized a little bit late. I actually just wanted to iron the seam allowance in at the base of the collar. Help us with sewing later. And someone commented a tip on one of my videos, spray starch, if the fabric won't hold the pressing well. Love tips like this. So if you have any golden tips like this, don't forget to leave them in the comments. Pinning the collars good sides together onto each other, all around the outer edges, since the fabric might have stretched out a little, it's a little wobbly. This is what the seam tape actually is used against, by the way. And we want to make sure that the seam allowance on the outer collar is still folded in, so add a pin through it as well. And then we're gonna sew it back like a standard collar sewing technique, closing the outer edges first. Being mindful in the corners, you might want to use the hand wheel, because we want both corners to be like similar, very similar. Yes, very similar. Then I trim half of the seam allowance off, and especially the corners, so that when we turn it inside out, we can create super sharp corners. Yeah, and I think I have a problem where I'm never ever really satisfied with any corner I make. So I push and I pull and I push and I pull and I push and I with my pin. But be careful, because what you don't want is this, the raw edge coming out. No freaking comment. Didn't happen. A good press will always impress. I've flattened the texture now anyway,
but if you want to preserve your fabric, you might skip this step and only do a top stitch. Now we have to get that thing back in. I'm deciding the middle of the collar and the middle of the neckline with the fold and hold technique, which is definitely a term that I might have made up to make it sound like something, but it's exactly what it sounds like. Fold it and decide where the middle is, so that at least we have one notch and sort of a reference of how to pin which is the next step all around the curve. So I pin the middle backs together, then the ends of the collar at the jacket, and then work inward, trying to divide the fabric well. If you get the feeling that something's not right, nothing fits, everything is going to shit, you're probably on the right track. Stay calm, carry on, and enjoy the process. Ew. Now close it on the sewing machine. The beginning and end of the seam can be a little tricky because one seam allowance is still folded in. So if your sewing machine, like mine, has some startup problems when there's a lot of bulk, what I tend to do is skip the first corner and just start sewing the seam a little bit further inward, and then later come back to start sewing towards this corner to finish it, because it's usually easier to sew towards than from a bulky corner. Now we can attach the upper side, basically just over the stitch line we just made, so that it will be hidden underneath. To make this easier, I'm gonna use a basting stitch, just a temporary very big hand stitch to hold it in place right where we want. So make a stitch pretty much on the edge, right where we're gonna top stitch over it with the machine later, which we can do in one go all around. Edge stitch every edge of the collar, and of course do not forget to add back oh no, don't tell me you lost your loop.
Oh my god!
Just kidding, but honestly I'm quite proud that I thought about putting it back myself. Miracles do exist. No pins, no pain. You can just concentrate on your sewing game. At least that's what I thought. But the machine isn't sewing again.
Middle process chaos again. Let's have a look in the mirror. Took forever, also because of the sewing machine, also because of the sewing machine, but turned out pretty good. This is more of a collar now, if you know what I mean. More pronounced, that's what I mean. You can see if you go much larger with the collar, it will probably get a little comical. We're gonna add some adjustments as well, which is sort of this sort of overlap that they created. And I thought that's actually a really nice one to make this jacket look a little bit more oversized and without having to change the arm line, because here we still fit our sleeve in later.
So to create this overlap, I actually want to copy those two pieces and then add a little bit of extra length at the bottom and the shoulder, just to be sure. So I transfer it onto paper with my medieval torture device, tracing all the seams one by one, so that I have a basic pattern I can add some length to at the bottom and at the shoulder.
Am I just really gonna use a Sharpie here? I think so. Just so that you can see a little bit what's going on my newspaper.
That's better. Now you can actually see that I add length to the bottom, keep the shoulder and neckline the same, add to the outer shoulder to create this oversized silhouette. For some reason I also drew on some fringe, which don't do that. That's not pattern drawing. The back side I'm also gonna copy the whole piece to then fold it in half to create a half pattern. This is the moment where you can see how shockingly perfect you have copied the pattern. Oh well, okay, maybe it's not that symmetrical. In that case, what do? Like most things in life, you don't choose one or the other, but you have to compromise and go somewhere in the middle. I stick the front and back piece temporarily together, mostly to make sure that I add the same extra length at the shoulder. Technically you could leave the patterns together like that and avoid having to sew the shoulder seam, but I'm gonna make one more adjustment to the pattern, which is slicing the back part to create some extra space. Attempt to create a little bit more of a relaxed feel. It looks complicated, but honestly all I do is put it sort of back in a sort of fan pattern to create some extra space at the bottom whilst keeping the shoulder and neckline the same. But you don't want to add too much space in between, unless you want to create this ruffled look. To each his own. Copy the pattern one more time to create smooth and continuous lines, middling out where necessary, just like before. And copy that exact same piece to add to the other side to make the half pattern whole again.
So I think I'm gonna use this one, a little bit ton sur ton, or whatever you would call it.
Cutting the parts out on the grain line, but if not possible, you can flip it 90 degrees, because it's gonna be a double-faced situation. I have 4 of the front parts and 2 of the back parts, joining front and back at the shoulder seam first. Repeat one more time, and you should have 2 pieces that look like this. You can iron the seam allowances open, but for a bit of a nice jeansy detail, I'm gonna edge stitch the seam allowance towards the back, so top stitching really close to the seam, catching both seam allowances underneath. Then I lay a good side on the good side, apparently already thinning out the seam allowance, which is normally done after sewing, just cutting it diagonally off, and then closing the 2 parts together at the front side and the neckline. Remember, the idea is that this is going to be sort of a loose element that we kind of just throw over the jacket, and wherever there is curves, there is cuts. Cutting in or even trimming down the seam allowance will allow for flexibility and a much nicer result when we turn that thing around. Press to impress, and then edge stitch all around, and then
I don't want to say well, but I want to say well. I'm not so convinced about this yet, to be honest. I don't know what about you. I think I want to cry. To me, it does not make any sense at all. But I think to really make some final decisions, we need to first finish the sleeves and the sides, and then we have a much better overview.
ladies, gents, no need to panic. That is not yet. Don't sleeve me now, because for the sleeves I have some serious tricks up my sleeves. First of all, they need to be fashionably long, which you can easily achieve by adding a wide contrasting cuff, just like in the image. So I ditched the cuffs that are on there and opened the bottom seam of the sleeve with my seam ripper. Ta-da! Now things are gonna get complicated, if not overcomplicated. Probably I should have never gotten the sleeves out in the first place and just sew the fringe nicely on top. But do with that what you will, it's now a little late. I was under the assumption we would get a much more professional result if we would really integrate the fringe in a seam in the sleeve, as in the image. But think about it, adding an extra seam into the sleeve will reduce the circumference of the sleeve, as in the sleeve won't fit in the armhole anymore. But yes, leave it up to your favorite delusional designer, talking about myself here, to come up with a creative solution, which is adding this panel at the underside of the sleeve. And now that we're at it, I'm not just adding the extra 2 cm seam allowance, but adding some extra width to make the sleeves a little more oversized. And if you're thinking now, then again, it's not gonna fit in the armhole anymore, then I love you. You are totally right. So I'm gonna add the same width as I add to the sleeve at the side of the jacket. See where this is getting a little complicated? So I basically guesstimated, pinned it in, then made the piece smaller, pinned it in again, aka pinning until you're winning. That's enough. Came up with sort of this kind of shape to add in the side, which is way too long because I want to add a big hem in it that is as wide as the hem of the jacket. Only I'm gonna fold it in simply 2 times and close it with 2 top stitches that sort of correspond with the 2 top stitches that are already on my jacket, closing the side seams with a very edgy inside out edge. But obviously you can also just make normal seams. What I do after I close the seam, in each seam allowance add a zigzag stitch, but not all the way over the edge. This way we get a little bit of fraying without the sleeves completely falling apart after wearing and washing couple of times. Fray, hey, hey. Slay. Okay. The sleeve is enlarged in the exact same way. Remember, the width added in the armpit is exactly the same as the width added in the armpit of the jacket. The sleeve still has to fit. In fact, the strip of fabric that I added to the sleeve was actually identical to the strip I added in the side of the jacket. We have our sleeve finally closed again. You guessed it. We're gonna open it again to add our ring. If you don't know how your sleeve is placed into the armhole anymore, usually these seams on the back of the shoulder and the back of the sleeve should match up. But you might want to check that before you get the sleeve out. But I want to fixate it for a minute to decide what is the outer side of the sleeve, where we're gonna add our fringe, for which you can basically think the upper shoulder seam as the starting point, and then a straight line down towards the hem, which should be more or less in a 90-degree angle. Best to hang the sleeve around your arm first to check if the line is really going straight down before copying it to the second sleeve and cutting it open. Sleeve is open, now is a good moment to check what kind of cuff we want to add at the bottom. Oh yeah, small detail, we almost forgot the cuff to be added before the fringe. I want to keep this split, so the cuff is gonna consist out of 2 parts that I both have to cut a little bit longer so that I have some seam allowance at the split. Because we all turned into slaves of AI at this point, and AI is telling me to distress the cuffs as well. I'm distressing the cuffs as well. Boy, was I getting a little tired of it now.
I have the cuffs pinned on. I just want to check the length. That's all. The highest point is the shoulder of the sleeve.
I decided to make the cuffs a little bit smaller. Obviously not on the side that I just spent an hour distressing. Like a regular cuff, I'm using 2 layers of fabric, which I'm gonna close along the side of the split first. Good side on good side. And I do this for both sides, so the bigger and the smaller part of the cuff. Afterward, I trimmed the seam allowance quite a bit so that when I turn it around and then top stitch a little bit from the edge, the seam allowance is fully enclosed, which would normally be super nice, but in this case actually had no purpose whatsoever. I might not have realized nobody's ever gotta look at the inside of the cuff anymore. Then I'm gonna sew the cuff on, but not good side on good side, but in a sort of overlapping manner. Raw edge living on the edge, just like the inspiration. And yes, I did a zigzag stitch to make it a little more strong. Finally, fringe that I'm simply gonna add in between the open seam. And my idea was to make the seam allowance of this seam a little bit smaller than normally.
Because obviously there's a whole thought behind this shape as well.
So the attempt was to change as little to the cap of the sleeve as possible. I know you hear it coming already. But let's first close the seam in all sweet naivety that we're still right on track on the fashion rack. To add the sleeve back in the armhole. In my first attempt I was trying to do the inside out seam here as well. I'm just trying to divide the fabric very well in between my pins. So the seams in the armpits meet, whilst the seam on the back meeting the seam on the back of the sleeve.
The sleeve is just not okay anymore. Ah! Surprise! Yeah, we made so many changes. Did I have a little crisis yesterday when I finally had in the sleeve? I think if there's one thing we learned today from this whole tutorial, it's that probably you shouldn't make too much changes to a sleeve. Do you see it? Comment below if you see it, because I hope it can still make a little bit of improvement, but it's just giving this drape here that I did not plan for. I'm not here for it.
So I Morse coded my friend, who's a pattern drafter, with this urgent extra special fashion emergency. She said all we have to do is make it lower at the bottom and higher at the top. You said, higher? Well, since we can't cut it back on, may I have some extra special fashion magic? Voila, a higher sleeve cap. Admittedly, it's not the prettiest thing ever, but nothing that a little fringe cannot hide. Wink wink, yo, in upcycling there's always a creative solution for everything you, well, fuck up.
I did wash these to make the fray a little more slay. I have this shoulder piece that I sort of just lay over it now. I didn't attach it. I don't know. I really feel like we sort of don't need it. Maybe we do. Help me out. Do you think this shoulder piece does add something? I will show both options. Thank you for everyone who loves to subscribe, to go on journeys with me. Just a nice way of saying we take a lot of time to do extensive projects, but I'm gonna get some easier projects in there. Thank you so much for my Patreons, for being my Patreons. Thank you so much for my watchers, for being my watchers. Thank you so much to myself for finally finishing this jacket.